hands didn't shake. That was the thing nobody understood. Not the hospital administrator who slid the termination letter across his desk without making eye contact. Not the union rep who kept apologizing like it was somehow his fault. And certainly not the two security guards who walked her to her locker while her colleagues pretended to be very busy with their charts. Nurse Maren Cole's hands didn't shake. They never did. Not when she was 22 and pulling shrapnel from a sergeant's thigh in a forward operating base outside Kandahar while the building 200 meters away was still on fire. Not when she was 26 and working a mass casualty event in the port of Halifax with 4 patients coding simultaneously. Not now at 34, when a man named Administrator Delaney told her that her pattern of insubordination had made her position at St. Marguerite General untenable. She packed her locker in 11 minutes. Blue stethoscope. A photo of Lake Superior in October, pinned to the inside door. A card her patient Mrs. Fortier had drawn for her in crayon because Mrs. Fortier was 81 and didn't trust store-bought cards. Maren folded it carefully and put it in her jacket pocket, right over her sternum, like a small shield. It was a Tuesday in November. The kind of gray Tuesday that felt like the sky had given up. She'd known it was coming. In a way, she'd been waiting for it the way you wait for a headache that starts behind your eyes. You know the shape of it before it arrives. For 8 months, Maren had been filing incident reports, medication errors, a pattern of charting irregularities on the overnight surgical ward, 2 patients discharged prematurely, one of them readmitted 48 hours later in septic shock. She'd brought it to her charge nurse first, then to Dr. Sogners first, Harmon, the department head, then to the patient safety officer, a woman named Garfield who took careful notes and never followed up. Every time she filed a report, something small happened. Her shifts got moved. Her locker was relocated to the far end of the corridor near the maintenance room. A performance review materialized out of nowhere, her first negative one in 7 years of nursing. She understood the language. She was fluent in it. What she hadn't expected was how quiet the hallway would feel on the way out. How ordinary. A nurse she'd worked alongside for 4 years glanced up from the nursing station, looked at the security escort, and looked back down at her computer without a word. That was the part that sat in her chest wrong. Not the firing itself, the silence of people who saw and said nothing. The parking lot at St. Marguerite General smelled like exhaust and old snow. Maren sat in her car for a long time without starting it. She wasn't crying. She was thinking about what she knew and what she could prove, and she was calculating the distance between those two things. It was considerable. She drove north out of Sudbury on the Trans-Canada because she needed to think, and she couldn't think sitting still. The trees came up on both sides of the highway, spruce and birch stripped bare for winter, and the sky stayed that flat gray color all the way to the turnoff for her sister's place near Lively. She didn't stop there. She kept driving until she hit the pull-off near Windy Lake, where she used to go with her father when she was small, where the granite came right down to the water's edge, and the wind made enough noise that your thoughts had to compete for space. She got out of the car and stood at the edge of the rock. The lake was starting to skin over at the edges. Another 2 weeks, and it would be solid enough to walk on. She thought about the flash drive in her apartment, the one she'd been keeping in the false bottom of her bathroom cabinet, wrapped in a cloth usually reserved for cleaning her grandfather's old service pistol. 14 months of documentation, photographs of medication records, the identified patient files she'd copied with permission from the families who'd started asking questions, emails she'd screenshotted before they disappeared from the hospital's server. She thought about what she was going to do with it. She hadn't decided yet. That was the honest answer. She told herself she was building a case, but a case for whom exactly? The regulatory college? They'd already dismissed one complaint she'd filed, a terse letter about insufficient evidence. A journalist? She'd reached out to a health reporter at the Sudbury Star 6 weeks ago and received a polite non-reply. A lawyer? She'd consulted one. He'd told her what she'd already suspected. She had enough to be interesting, but not enough to be actionable. Not yet. What she had, mostly, was a clear picture of something very wrong, and no clear path to making anyone care about it. She drove back to Sudbury as the light failed. The city came up over the hill, the big stack at the Superstack site still visible on the horizon even now, even decommissioned, standing there like it was waiting for something. She had that feeling too sometimes, like she was waiting for the moment when the thing she knew would finally be useful. She didn't have long to wait. The message came 3 days later. Not a call, a message delivered in person, which was unusual enough that it stayed with her afterward, the deliberateness of it. She was at the metro on La Salle when a man in a dark jacket stood in the aisle next to the soup cans and said her name. Not Nurse Cole. Not Miss Cole. Just her first name, low and direct, like he was confirming something he already knew. She turned. He was mid-40s, the kind of face that gave away almost nothing. Not unfriendly, not warm, just contained. He said he was with a federal agency. He showed her identification that she looked at carefully. She'd been trained to look at things carefully. She'd been trained to look at things carefully. He said his name was Warrant Officer Reeves, and that he'd like to talk to her about St. Marguerite General. She put the tin of soup back on the shelf. I have time now, she said. They sat in the Tim Hortons across the street because Maren chose it. Specifically because it was loud and public and she knew 2 of the staff by name. Reeves didn't seem bothered. He ordered a black coffee and wrapped both hands around the cup and didn't say anything for a moment, and she recognized that pause. It was the pause of someone deciding how much to tell you and where to start. We've been watching the situation at St. Marguerite for 14 months, he said. Maren looked at him. 14 months is when I started filing reports, she said. We know. She felt something shift in her chest. Not quite anger, not quite relief, something in between that didn't have a name. So you watched, she said. We needed documentation from the inside. Documentation from someone who couldn't be written off as a disgruntled employee with an axe to grind. Someone with a clean record, a credible history, and the professional standing to make the evidence stick. He looked at her. Someone with your kind of training. I'm a nurse, she said. Emergency department. Before that, she was quiet for a moment. The coffee machine behind the counter made a long, grinding noise. You've done your research, she said. Canadian Forces. 6 years. 2 tours. Medic, later advanced trauma instructor at CFB Petawawa. Commendation for action in theater in 2015 that's still technically classified. He said it the way you'd read a list out loud, without inflection, and then you came home and got your RN and went to work at St. Marguerite General, and, apparently, could not stop yourself from noticing things that were wrong. It's a hard habit to break, she said. He almost smiled. Not quite. We're at the point where we can move, he said. The procurement fraud alone is enough for charges. The patient harm piece is harder. Jurisdiction issues. Provincial versus federal oversight. The usual complications. But we have an opportunity in the next few weeks to bring this in cleanly. The issue is that we need someone inside who can verify the chain of documents, who can stand in front of a regulatory tribunal and say, with authority, what the clinical implications of these decisions were. You want me to testify. We want you to be ready to testify. There's a difference. He took a drink of his coffee. There may also be a period before this becomes public where your safety is a relevant consideration. She looked at him for a long moment. Outside, it had started to snow. The fine, dry kind that blows sideways. I have a flash drive, she said. We know about the flash drive. Of course you do. She looked out the window at the snow. She thought about the 14 months. The incident reports that went nowhere. The shift changes. The colleagues who didn't look up. Mrs. Fortier's crayon drawing still in her jacket pocket. What do you need from me? She said. What they needed, it turned out, was more than she'd initially understood. The fraud at St. Marguerite wasn't a rogue administrator padding his expense account. It was a coordinated scheme running through 3 departments: surgical procurement, pharmacy, and patient services that had been operational for at least 4 years. The scheme worked by inflating contract values on medical supply orders, splitting the overage through a series of numbered companies, and funneling the money into a network of accounts that terminated, eventually, in a construction firm in Mississauga with connections to 2 municipal councillors and a former provincial health official. Inspector Tran, the federal investigator formally assigned to coordinate with Maren, explained it to her in stages over the course of several meetings in an unremarkable office above a tax preparation service on Elm Street. She was a compact, precise woman who answered questions directly and didn't dress up bad news. Maren liked her immediately. "The patient discharge irregularities you flagged," Tran said during their third meeting, spreading a timeline across the table. "That wasn't incompetence. The early discharges were reducing the documentation footprint for specific patients, people connected to the scheme who were receiving preferential treatment, procedures billed at one rate and carried out at another. Your incident reports were going to Garfield in patient safety, who was reporting to Delaney, who is one of the architects." Maren looked at the timeline. She thought about the early discharge patient who'd come back in septic shock. Mr. Beausoleil, 78, who'd lost partial function in his left hand as a result of the delay in treatment. "He knew," she said. "Garfield, he knew when I was filing those reports." Yes. "And the termination was to get you out before you found the pharmacy piece. You were close. The charting irregularities you'd started photographing were the edge of it." Tran paused. "You were actually approximately 3 weeks away from having enough to go directly to the RCNP yourself." Maren thought about sitting in her car in the parking lot at St. Marguerite, not crying, calculating the distance between what she knew and what she could prove. She thought about how she'd driven north because she needed to think. "What do you need me to do?" she said. "For now, review the documentation, confirm the clinical interpretations, and be prepared to provide a statutory declaration. The tribunal convenes in 6 weeks. We'd like you available and, if possible, not broadcasting your involvement." "I haven't told anyone." "Good." "I should mention," Maren said, "that my former colleague, Dr. Ford, has been asking around about me. He worked the overnight surgical ward. I don't know which side of this he's on." Tran made a note. "We'll look at Ford," she said. That night, driving home through the snow-narrowed streets of Sudbury, Maren allowed herself, for the first time in months, to feel something that was close to. Not optimism, exactly. More like alignment, like the long, grinding work of paying attention to things others were ignoring had finally connected to something with enough weight to move. She was still careful. She didn't change her routine significantly. She went to see her sister in Lively on the weekend, sat in the kitchen drinking tea and watching her nephew do his homework at the table, and said nothing about any of it. Her sister asked how she was holding up since the hospital, and Maren said, "Fine," and meant it in a way she hadn't for a while. But she stayed alert. She noticed when a car she didn't recognize sat outside her building for 2 evenings in a row. She noticed when her neighbor mentioned a man had been asking which unit was hers. She texted Tran about both. Each time Tran replied, "We see it. You're covered. Stay in your routine." She stayed in her routine. The thing about Maren Cole that most people at St. Marguerite had failed to understand, had perhaps not been curious enough to investigate, was that her composure wasn't distance, it wasn't coldness, and it wasn't the professional blankness of someone who'd learned to stop caring in order to survive the work. It was training, a specific kind applied over years, in conditions where the cost of losing it was measured in other people's lives. In Kandahar, in the winter of 2014, her unit had been the first responder to a vehicle strike 6 kilometers outside the wire. She'd worked 4 casualties simultaneously in the back of an LAV with insufficient lighting and 1 functioning IV line. She'd made decisions in that 90-minute window that she still thought about. Not with regret, exactly, but with the particular weight of choices made at the edge of what's possible. All 4 soldiers survived to reach the Roll 3 facility. One of them sent her a Christmas card every year, still. She kept them in a shoebox in her closet. She'd left the forces at 28 because her mother was sick, and because she'd started to feel the edges of something that, if she didn't address it, would eventually take something from her. She wouldn't get back. She went home. She got her degree. She went to work in emergency nursing because it was the closest civilian equivalent to the work that felt like hers. Fast, high stakes, consequential, where the quality of your attention had a direct and immediate effect on whether someone went home to their family. She loved it with the particular love of someone who had found, late, the thing they were made for. That was why losing it had hurt the way it had. Not the job specifically, the purpose that lived inside it. Sitting in Tran's office on a Thursday afternoon in early December, Maren watched the federal investigator lay out the final structure of the case with the focused precision of someone placing the last piece of something very large and very fragile, and understood that the purpose hadn't gone anywhere. It had just been operating differently for a while. The tribunal convenes January 14th, Tran said. We'll need your declaration filed by the 28th of this month. I'll have it ready. There's one additional development. Tran paused. Delaney has retained outside counsel and is indicating he'll contest the evidence chain. His position is that the charting records you flagged were within normal clinical variation. They weren't. We know. But we'll need you to say so clearly with specificity on the record. Tran looked at her. Are you prepared for that? Maren thought about Administrator Delaney sliding the termination letter across his desk without eye contact. She thought about Mr. Beausoleil and his left hand. She thought about the colleagues who hadn't looked up. Yes, she said. She filed the statutory declaration on a Wednesday morning. 19 pages. The language was precise and clinical and entirely her own. She'd declined the offer of a government-assigned writer because she wanted every sentence to mean exactly what she intended it to mean, and she was capable of doing that. Tran called her that afternoon. Delaney's legal team has seen the outline of your declaration, she said. They've amended his statement significantly. How significantly? He's named 4 additional individuals in exchange for consideration. Maren was quiet for a moment. Garfield, she said. Among others. A pause. Dr. Ford. She'd wondered about Ford. She felt something at hearing his name confirmed. Not satisfaction, not quite, more like the specific exhaustion of being right about something you'd hoped you were wrong about. The counselors in Mississauga, she asked. The RCMP is handling that piece. It's been formally transferred. Another pause, slightly different in quality. Maren, I want you to understand the scope of what you've done here. The fraud amounts to approximately $3.2 million over 4 years. The patient harm component is being reviewed by the college. They'll likely be looking at 8 to 12 cases. The discharge irregularities you flagged may turn out to be the clearest documentation we have of direct patient impact. 3.2 million. 8 to 12 cases. Numbers that meant people. Mr. Beausoleil's hand, how many others she didn't know yet. Okay, she said. One more thing, said Tran. The chief nursing officer at Nickel Belt Regional contacted our office yesterday, informally. She'd heard something, not about this specifically, but about a former St. Marguerite nurse. She's looking to fill a senior position. Emergency department. Maren looked out her window at the Sudbury Street below, at the gray afternoon light, at the snow that was coming down again in that dry, sideways way it had. Informally, she said. She's interested in having a direct conversation. I told her I'd pass it along. You can pass along that I'll call her. She stood by the window for a long time after she hung up, not thinking exactly. More just noticing, the light, the snow, the ordinary hum of the city going about its afternoon. The way things that had been suspended sometimes simply settled back into their right positions, quietly, without ceremony. She reached into her jacket pocket, and her fingers found the edge of Mrs. Fortier's crayon drawing. She'd been carrying it for months. She took it out and looked at it. A shape that was meant to be a nurse, Maren assumed, rendered in red and orange, with what appeared to be a very confident smile. She folded it carefully and put it back. Her hands were steady. They always had been. I keep thinking about the moment Maren packed her locker. 11 minutes. A stethoscope, a photograph, a crayon drawing from an 81-year-old patient. She didn't make a scene. She didn't argue with the security guards. She just folded that little drawing and put it over her heart and walked out into the gray November parking lot. And she sat in her car and thought about the distance between what she knew and what she could prove. That distance is where most people stop. I understand why. It's exhausting to be the one who keeps noticing when everyone around you has decided not to. It costs something. Your shifts, your reputation, eventually your job. The system isn't designed to reward the person who won't look away. It's designed, often, to remove them. But here's what I've come to believe. Watching a story like Maren's unfold, the consequences that eventually caught up to Delaney and Garfield and Ford weren't luck or coincidence. They were the accumulated weight of what they'd actually done, pressing down over time. Mr. Prufak, Bosley lost partial function in his hand because someone decided a billing irregularity was worth more than his recovery. That kind of choice doesn't disappear. It sits in the record. It waits. And the person who documented it, quietly, carefully, at personal cost, is the reason it was ever found at all. What strikes me most about Maren isn't the combat training, impressive as that is. It's the integrity. The fact that she filed the first incident report knowing nothing would probably happen, and then filed the next one anyway. That's not heroism in the dramatic sense. That's just someone who decided that what was true mattered more than what was convenient, and kept deciding that, day after day, even when the cost kept going up. There's a kind of intelligence in that too, not just cleverness, but the ability to read a situation clearly without letting fear or exhaustion distort the picture. Maren never lost sight of what she actually knew versus what she could prove. She stayed patient. She kept the flash drive. She didn't go to the media half-cocked with a story she couldn't yet substantiate. That discipline, knowing what you have, knowing what you still need, knowing the difference, is what eventually made her testimony matter. And then there's the question of what it takes to keep going when the thing you're doing isn't working yet. When the reports go nowhere. When colleagues don't look up. When you're driving north on the Trans-Canada in November because you need the sound of the wind to have room to think. That kind of persistence isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself. It just keeps showing up, day after day, in the form of one more careful observation, one more document saved, one more question asked. I think about the crayon drawn. She carried it for months. Through the termination and the uncertainty and the careful, dangerous work of the investigation, a small red and orange figure with a very confident smile drawn by someone whose care she had earned. That's the thing that holds. Not the titles, not the commendations. The evidence in someone else's handwriting that you showed up and it mattered.